Hey everyone, Professor May here. So since I recorded the last video talking about the OSINT frameworks, a number of new developments have occurred, a number of new frameworks have emerged, and I want to share these with you. So I think it's important to kind of get a glimpse of what else is out there. This is a ancillary to the main video that we discussed, because I still think that those are probably the most beneficial. These get into a little bit more detail on some of them, but I want to share them with you because I think you'll benefit from them. So in Helen Gibson's book called Open Source Intelligence Investigation, these two frameworks appeared. I just think they're very interesting. They replicate the intelligence cycle as we've talked about in previous lectures, and I just think it's, again, good to see that it is a cycle. It continues to flow. You're always trying to measure against the gaps and see what more information you can come up with. Because of the validation issue with so many problem or open source methods, it's hard to know what is accurate these days. So I like the fact that in her bottom chart, she really has this idea that a high degree of certainty, is a really important thing. So I wanted to stress that as well. Nico Deakins is he's Dutch. He goes by the handle Dutch OSINT guy. He wrote a blog, so he's a former law enforcement investigator in the Netherlands. He now does a lot of training and speaking on open source intelligence. He also works for Bellingcat. He wrote a blog post that I thought was really, really interesting and I think really helpful. I've linked it below here. It's on the OSINT Curious website. OSINT Curious is a group that has emerged of pretty top-notch OSINT folks from all over the community, all over the world, who really are pretty passionate about this. So definitely add that to your favorites if you don't have it already. But I thought this particular one was really interesting because he actually doesn't go into necessarily the framework, but he does talk a lot about understanding the research question. What is the information that your client or the requester is looking for? Like, what is it they're trying to answer? Looking at the topic and looking at it from what your adversary or what the opposing side may be viewing. Preparing and security are the two main focus points of this article, and I think that that's why I really like it. Preparing for it, knowing the tools, knowing the search parameters, being able to have a clean machine, clean VM is really important. The laptop you use, it will give you away. The computer you use, the cell phone you use, it can give you away. Understanding the profile of how you're searching, what your technology is, what you're using. So I think it's really important. So definitely take a look at that article. It's well worth the time. Okay, so we have a new grouping of tools from a website called gofindwho.com. I really liked this search flow methodology, just as another good example. So you start out with a basic piece of information. So in this case, it's jack@gmail.com. So that's what you know. What you're looking for is other information to see what profile can you build. So on this, you're looking for people. It brings us to this idea of getting more leads, additional things to search, confirmation, being able to verify and corroborate the data, and then building the profile. So as you can see here, I like it because there's a combination of both online data and real world data. You can really get very good at understanding the different tools that are out there, but also thinking of approaching it in a variety of ways. Thinking about just putting one thing into Google is not going to bring back really good results generally. It's a start, but it may not give you the full picture. And so that's what I really like. It's this whole idea of different information sources, different information avenues, pathways. And again, you see it's very complicated, but it'll get you to that profile. Net Bootcamp is another training site. I really like this model because he talks deep about investigations of actual websites, and so we do spend a lot of time on this. So I want to highlight this for you as well. Another great article at netbootcamp.org. But here he talks about the 5 different ways, things like the domain and the IP address, what the actual website has, if they're related websites, and then follow on social media, and then things like operator IDs, usernames, personas, things like that. Here he breaks it down even further. Again, looking at the registration, the domain history, who hosts it, where it's hosted, what other IP addresses are on that, if there were any reassignments, and then just building on that, looking at the website itself, the subdomains, the sitemaps, the HTML code, the archive.org, any user profiles associated with it. What are the related websites, backlinks, referrals, the analytics, shared code, things like that your Amazon ID number and things of that nature. That leads us to social media, right? Almost every site, every business has both a website and a social media presence. Very few places actually have only a social media presence, but many of them have both, and many of them are really starting to pull them together and really integrate them. And so that can be a very, very useful data point. And of course, if you look at things like first followers or screen names or emails within it, then you can go and pull that information for that person, especially if they're closely associated with the business, say like the CEO or the owner or the registrar of the website. This is a really, really good continuum. I think it's an excellent way if you are going to do your final project or some of your other practicals. This is definitely something that you'll want to keep close. So go back to that netbootcamp.org address that I just showed and get that. This is a little busy, but I like it. WebReacher is also a member of the OSINT Curious community. Somebody that he is friends with developed this after taking one of the SANS courses that he teaches. I like it just because I think it's a neat way to look at it. It doesn't really tell us anything new. If you go to that article, it actually discusses further. This is a very interactive program apparently that this individual has designed. So take a look at that. But I just like the way that it was constructed, and I thought it was a neat way to think about it. A new group that's popped up recently is OSINT Combine. They're an Australian group doing a lot of training. The principals appear to be law enforcement type folks, and so they have a really neat site. They've also developed this thing called the collection schema. So they basically group things and they talk about the fact that they're all related. So whether you're searching for a person or an organization or a place or an event or an action or a product, they all kind of have the same types of issues that need to be addressed. So they've developed the schema architecture to be able to do that. So I encourage you to go out, look at those. They are really a neat group. So that's a good. But I like the fact that it really shows you how interconnected a lot of these things really are. And you need to, in order to develop a full picture, you really need it to have that solid big picture understanding of everything that's going on. So this is really recent, that just came out as I'm recording this. This is a very cool schematic that discusses a corporate review. It starts with the company, it starts with the structures, it moves to the personnel and people associated with it, their networks, and then goes to things like the public sentiment of what's happening. It also talks about vulnerabilities, the technical artifacts, potential illegal activity. Each of these is then further broken down, so we're actually going to go walk through this. But I thought that, again, as a framework of thinking about company and entity questions, this is probably one of the better ones that I've seen. So let's walk through this. So you start out with the data sources for, say, the company overview. So you want to know what the stated mission is, what the perceived mission is, and you can get those things from like the website of the company itself, or perceived mission could be from other social media, or just doing some general searches. Review sites are really good for this. The personnel size, the potential budget or financials could be really good. Locations of actual physical sites of the company, primary markets, and of course registration details in terms of the parent companies and subsidiaries. And next, that leads us into the corporate structures. Who are the shareholders? Who are the leadership? Who are the influencers associated with this? Things like board of directors, advisory groups, former employees who are very active. Wealth metrics obviously are going to be tied to your financials. And then, of course, you want to know what kind of threats are potentially out there. What are they looking at? And we'll talk more about threats and things in a few minutes. Then, of course, it moves into once you kind of hit the top level of the corporate structure and the entity itself, then you start diving down into the people, right? The personnel, LinkedIn, obviously, and then how are they recruiting? You want to see, are they recruiting from their website? Are they recruiting from other resume job sites? Are they active in things like schools, universities? That can be really helpful. And then building the link analysis, the professional networks, again, showing where people are physically, but also what their connections are. You can learn a lot just by seeing exactly who's kind of connected to whom, what their relationships are, what their commonalities are. And of course, things like, you want to know what public sentiment is, what kind of issues are they having, what kind of reviews are they getting, what's the media saying. Again, thinking about it in terms of that framework is really, really helpful. So I really like this framework for looking at business entities particularly. One of the things that the OSINT Combine hierarchy did not really address, that I think is really important and should be its own standalone architecture is the supply chain risk. I found this this framework here. Supply chain is really important, right? It's the Amazons, it's the Walmarts, it's the, how do we get from the raw goods all the way up to delivering the package to your doorstep. OSINT is a wonderful, wonderful way to be able to do these types of reviews and analyze them. You can create an OSINT-driven topology of the supply chain, who the people are, very similar to the architecture we just saw. Then you want to also be able to drill down into some of the risk areas. Once you kind of map out that topology of who's who, then you can start using this framework to then go deeper and really identify what kind of risks are out there. But you can also set it up so that there's continuous monitoring, so you can actually see in real time or near real time when problems could start to arise. So if you have that social media pull, if you have that continuous monitoring, if you have that sentiment tracking type of system set up from your OSINT, then you can be able to really start to see when there are changes that you need to look at. And of course, I was so excited when Michael Bazzell came out with his 7th edition Open Source Intelligence Techniques book. If you have not gotten this book or a previous version, I highly recommend it. I almost made it a required reading for this course, but I think because everything changed so quickly when we were developing this initially, I really wanted to stay away from a formal book. But if I can ever come to recommend a book, I cannot recommend this one enough. I think that this is probably one of the most, it's over 500 pages of just pure, not just tools, but techniques, and really fundamentally understanding what's underneath the hood. But it's also, he added a whole lot, and I'm really excited because he added a whole lot of chapters on things like the methodology and really taking the time to understand exactly what you're doing and why and how, reporting on it, being able to identify what you did, how you did it, and what the results were. So this chart I made from his, and he basically breaks it down into essentially 5 different primary engagement types that you would be involved in as he sees it. You could be doing threat assessment of individuals. You could be doing threat assessments for events. You could be targeting individuals, whether they were known or unknown. If somebody is making, if you're doing, say, for example, a good example would be a background investigation. So you know that person, you understand they filled out an employment application and the company is ready to hire them. Now you need to be able to go and really examine that person. You certainly have organizations and entities. We've talked a lot about that today. The whole idea is being able to really identify the topology of that entity and who is behind it. And then finally, digital account attribution or identification. This is, of course, if somebody makes a threat on social media, you want to know who that is and be able to provide the appropriate information to, say, law enforcement. So the methodology, the workflow that he has is an intake and a triage session, preparing the tools that you're going to use. He spends a lot of time on preparing the actual machine and the tools and the operating environment that you are going to use in order, primarily for privacy, if nothing else. He recommends doing an initial search on closed data, things like your Accurant, your TLO, your Clear, any of those kind of data aggregators that you have to subscribe to. If you have access to that, that certainly can, that initial search can be really helpful. Even if you don't have the closed data, that initial search to at least see what you have. And then obviously using your OSINT tools. You have to collect and preserve the data. You have to analyze it and figure out what it actually means and what's important and what's not and why. And that goes back to your intake and triage, in my opinion. I think you would agree. Also, you have reporting and then archiving. Again, cannot recommend this book highly enough. I bought it the first day it was available. It is well worth I think it's $50 approximately price. It's available on Amazon, and it's like the Bible, and I think it's very, very well done. The other thing Michael does is he puts these flowcharts together, and he recently redid these, and I have actually included them in your materials. But here he breaks it down by real name, by username, and then moves on. But again, he gives you really good things to think about in terms of what are you doing, how are you doing it, and what are you moving to. And then here he lists the domain name and the email address, and again does the same thing, lots of options. When one of these doesn't work or goes away, you really understand how to be able to replicate it in some other tool or look for what it is that that original tool provided, so you can understand how to try and do it yourself. And then here's telephone number and location. Again, really, this is a phenomenal resource. I've included this in the module. I believe it's module number 4. So you'll actually have full-size PDF of these. Really, really useful. I highly recommend just printing them out and keeping them with you. So when we wrap up, I thought that it was really helpful to think about the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has an online investigations course. They have 5 things that they talk about, and I think it's a useful, very simple framework. If you're explaining what you're doing, you compile everything you know, you conduct the searches, you look at social media, you identify further leads that can be exploited, you analyze those results, and then you follow each lead until you hit your logical dead end. And so that's what you do, and you keep doing it until you have the information that you need. And finally, from Untangling the Web, again, one of my very favorites. Make sure you use the right tool for the right job. The websites should be the ones that really do the heavy lifting, not you. Make sure you have those bookmarks. There's so many neat tools now out there to be able to do this. You can really, there's a lot of websites now out there that are basically OSINT tool compilations. When Michael Bazel's tool set went down, there were a number of replicators that came back within a month or so that had essentially the same types of search capability. I've listed a number of those in the OSINT tools list for you. There's so many more out there, and I encourage you to just try them out and then make your own. Obviously, use more than one search engine. Read the instructions. That's really helpful, especially in an advanced search. Use those specialized or unique functions of foreign search engines when you're searching for foreign information. And I think one of the most important is know when to stop searching. That can be a really hard challenge for even experienced investigators, but especially new investigators too. That they just don't know exactly when enough is enough. They think, oh, I'll just try this one last thing, and it's great, but it really doesn't do much for you, doesn't add much value. So those are the rules for the road. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for staying with me, and happy hunting. Enjoy.